Hi everyone and welcome along. At this time of year we're spoilt for choice with amazing spring flowers. So today we're going to paint a camellia. This whole vase is actually from my mum's garden. I'm really lucky that I get the real thing. So grab your paints and let's get started. So here we have a lovely camellia, this one in full bloom and this one in bud form, and they're just absolutely delightful to look at. They grow in a sort of bush or tree format, so you just see a whole array of these incredible open flowers. Once cut, the flowers are quite sort of heavy and don't last on the stem very much, so I would recommend going out into the garden or seeing if you can go to a nice open garden somewhere to have a look at them. But I'll just pop those to one side and we're going to get our paints ready. So to get the lovely pink of the camellia, at the moment I'm really enjoying the combination of permanent rose and a little bit of yellow ochre, and it makes a really lovely blush colour, as long as you keep it nice and dilute. So that's the mix that I'm going to be using to make my flowers. We're going to be painting in a very loose style. It's my sort of controlled loose style that I take advantage of the translucent layers, and we layer up all these beautiful petals in that way. You'll have seen me do it quite a number of times with things like my anemones. But to start off, I'm going to just draw a very basic stem. So I start from the bottom, have a sort of bud coming off there and one coming up there, and I'm going to place my camellia about there. So I want to draw in a pencil circle, which is going to be the central sort of nucleus point for where my petals are going to be anchored. So I can put my pencil to one side, that's all we really need. I'm going to begin actually with the bud, so let's get the bud back in. It's a really sort of tight cup of a rather intense pink, so it's brighter and stronger, more concentrated than the flower, and also we've got the green sepals from underneath. So I'm going to again pop that out of the way, and I'm going to actually begin with some stronger permanent rose for the bud. Brushes wise, I've got some large ones here. I've got a 6 and a 4 and a 2, and then 2 mini ones, size 0 and 3/10. I'm going to get my 4/10 brush for this. No, I beg your pardon, my size 4 brush for this. And this one is all about having a bit of confidence with the brush, okay? I'm going to paint a nice sort of low, flat to the ground, to the page, C curve, and another C curve, and then I'm going to get a little bit of that yellow ochre colour with the permanent rose and just place that in there. And then I'm going to get my Sap Green, and I'm going to be very careful to paint in some sepals that might just touch the edge of some of this but not get too involved. Now I'm going to take some burnt sienna and a little bit of French ultramarine blue, and I'm just going to paint, just with my size 2 brush, a slightly gnarly stem, just as we saw, going downwards, and using the side of the brush to create some little knobbles as we go down, and that little bit of unpainted space is just really helpful. Now I'm going to start painting the actual main open flower. So I'm going to refresh my water, get a new jar of water, want to make sure everything is really nice and clean. And actually what I'll do is I'll bring my palette down to the side here, just so you can see me just mix up a bit more of that permanent rose with some of that yellow ochre, just as a reminder. And it's quite bright in the palette right now, but the more water I add, just diluting it down each time. And each time I add a bit of yellow ochre, it's just turning it from that really sort of strong pink into a more mellow blush. Okay, back up it goes. So the pointed round brush is just perfect for this, because what we're going to do is we're going to paint petals, beginning just with the fine tip of the brush, just overlapping into the central circle there, and then fanning out either side. And then I'm just going to allow a few brush strokes, really pressing down the brush into the onto the page, to just create a lovely sort of organic, slightly rippled rough edge. And after doing one or two, I'm just going to take my size 2 brush, a bit of permanent rose, a little more concentrated, and just dab a little bit into the centre there. The reason I painted 2 and then popped in the pink was I just wanted that first petal to have a little bit more time to settle in. So you can see it doesn't matter if the sort of wider edges of the petals bleed into one another, but I am just trying to get a little bit of separation just in the centre where the delicate petals meet. And you can also see that I'm being purposefully sort of chaotic with the brush, I suppose is a good way of describing it, when I paint in those outer edges of the petals, because I want there to be a lovely sort of wildness. So I'm not being particularly delicate with it, being quite rough. And that's a 5th petal we just managed to squeeze in there. Okay, so we're going to let that dry. We want it to dry to allow for the next layer of petals. But what I'm actually going to do, and this seems a bit of a strange move, but it's all part of the style of loose watercolour painting. I am now going to continue on with my little bits of stem painting, and just watch. I'm going to go very close up. I'm not going to go so close that I touch the flower just yet, but I am going to now add a few leaves, and if they end up touching the flower, I am not upset about that at all, because it's all part of the style of loose watercolour painting. So let's have a look at these leaves. I've got my size 4 brush. I've got Sap Green, and I've got a little bit of French Ultrmarine blue, because these leaves are just, they're a bold deep green. And I'm going to squash the brush down, and if we get a little bit of that dry brushing, we can just add a little bit more there. And then I am going to just pair it just a touch of the blue at both ends, and then I'm going to place in a second leaf just by squishing the brush down and controlling it off the end, and placing in a second okay. And now so you see there's just that tiny hint of a touch, which I'm rather keen on. I just like the idea of it. And then we'll get a leaf coming off. Yeah, just a little bit. And because I've just given the flower just that little bit of time to start to dry, and it is a warm day as well, that does also have an impact on the drying process. It's just giving it a very, very subtle, gentle blend. Okay, so we really are going to let this dry 100% now, and then we can add the next layer of petals to the camellia. That is completely bone dry. It's really important that it is 100% dry for the next stage. Okay, I'm picking up more of that translucent mix, and it's so important that you have translucent petals, and I'm now painting in new petals with size 2 brush this time, but this time I'm not so worried about there being quite so much sort of unpainted space in the middle there, and also the petals are very much going to overlap. And by just filling them in with water and just gradually building a second layer of lovely camellia petals. And it feels at this point like you might be ruining your work, but trust me, you're not. I am going to pop in a dab or two of permanent rose, and we are going to wait for that to dry once again. So if you're sort of sitting here going, oh, well, this is going to take ages, why not paint loads of camellias all over a page? And by the time you have painted, or by the time you've painted like 5 or 6, the first one you've done will have dried and you'll be ready to do the next layer. Now what's really going to make this camellia look fantastic as we add another layer is just noticing that with the real thing, the new petals still sort of reach out to the edges. So I'm going to be painting in now the petals that don't just necessarily get smaller. So I'm going to pop in one here, and you can sort of keep a slightly sort of uneven petal sort of edge to the flower, but as long as you're keeping it nice and translucent. And then some might sort of become a little bit smaller, some might be a bit thinner. Just make sure you're not just sort of going through the motions of just painting like pretty flower without much thought of a nice sort of organic wildness to it. And then just a bit more pink, and we let that dry one more time. Now that last layer has dried, and you can see how doing the translucent paint just crisps into these beautiful edges. But now we can see all the lovely yellow little filaments and anthers in the centre of the flower. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use cadmium yellow, because cadmium yellow is rather opaque, and I've got it very nice and concentrated, and I am going to just dot in that centre using that central circle that I drew in pencil at the beginning. So I'm just trying to make it not too uniform. That's the thing, you don't want these dots to be too neat. And then just one or two scattered a bit further, dispersed a bit further. And there you have a lovely loose watercolour, but controlled loose because we've used the translucent watercolour to layer up and create beautiful layers. A lovely camellia.
Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. I want to say a huge thank you to our patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with that one. And of course, if you share your work on social media, tag us at the Winton Paper Co on Instagram, and I'd love to see your paintings. And of course, if you never want to miss another video, just hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell, and we'll see you again next time. Bye!